The Center for Unhindered Living presents Plus Size Polyamory with Judy and Alan, where our motto is, don't follow the crowd, follow your heart. Good morning. I hope you're all having a great day so far. Welcome to episode 21. We're Judy and Alan, and today we are talking about shame.
And why did we decide to talk about this topic today?
Well, because this is something that affects almost every person on the face of the earth, especially people in the poly community.
Have you ever experienced shame as a member of the poly community?
Well, if you've ever engaged in a conversation about polyamory with a monogamous person, you've probably been subjected to an attempt at shaming. Yes, people have attempted to cast aspersions on my lifestyle, but I don't allow it. According to Scientific American, in an article entitled The Scientific Underpinnings and Impact of Shame, certain conditions must come together for someone to feel shame.
First, the person must be aware of having violated a norm. Second, they must see the norm as desirable and binding. If they don't, then breaking the norm would have no effect on them.
This is where we may conjure up mental images of a parent, a teacher, or some other authority figure shaming us. A disapproving person doesn't even have to be present. Just thinking about how disappointed they might be in us is enough to bring on feelings of shame.
We need to make a distinction between guilt and shame. Guilt is something we focus inward on our actions. Shame is something imposed on us from outside by others.
I first became interested in learning about shame when I asked myself, is shame something inborn or is it totally a learned behavior? Many are saying that it's inborn because supposedly that it must be a trait that natural selection preserved because it was productive to the species.
Charles Darwin first studied shame by observing that humans are the only species that blush. As evidenced by many interesting experiments with primates, monkeys, and great apes, they don't have the appropriate cognitive structures to construct social norms. Unless you can recognize you are violating a norm, you can't feel shame.
For instance, if I steal something that doesn't belong to me, feelings of guilt about that would be appropriate. We've been all been socialized to believe that stealing is wrong. But let's say that you're a victim of food insecurity and you choose to accept SNAP benefits to obtain food. But if as a child you constantly heard your parents say it's not appropriate to accept charity, then you would probably, you should be able to provide for yourself through honest work. Then you might feel ashamed to accept those benefits. There's no rational reason not to accept them, except this little voice in your head telling you this is wrong. You might still accept them, but continue to feel ashamed of yourself for what you perceive as a moral failure.
We feel shame when we violate the social norms we believe in. Then shame makes us direct our focus inward and we view our entire self in a negative light. And according to the research, women are quicker to feel humiliated than men, and adolescents feel shame more intensely than adults do. Therefore, women and teens are more susceptible to the negative effects of low self-esteem and depression.
Now, it's been speculated that humans feel shame because it conferred some evolutionary advantage to our species. However, the research shows that shame prevents people from behaving in socially constructive ways, and that it's actually guilt, not shame, that promotes socially adaptive behavior.
Guilt and shame seem to always get lumped together as if they are the same, but they're not. One is constructive, the other is destructive.
We see shame today totally differently than they did, say, 50 years ago. To quote from a New York Times article in 1974 that noted the important societal role of shame, quote, "The loss of shame threatens our survival as a civilized species. For most of the acts that we are ashamed of are not punishable by law, and civilized living depends on the observance of unenforceable rules." That's from page 15 of the book, Culture of Shame by Andrew P. Morrison, MD. I totally disagree, of course. Once we change our ideas about what civilized means, we won't need shame. According to shame and vulnerability researcher Brene Brown, women's top cause of shame is physical appearance, and men's top cause of shame is appearing weak. Now, how sexist are those? expectations. Specific to non-monogamy, here are a couple of common scenarios.
Brittany is a young woman who is particularly sensitive to her own sexual desires. Her embarrassment about sexual feelings seem to reflect her having been instructed during a puritanical childhood that nice girls don't experience such stirrings.
And then there's Edgar. Edgar experiences a strong desire for multiple poly relationships. But this voice keeps ringing in his ears from his religious upbringing that being faithful to his wife means denying his feelings of attraction for other men and women.
Look, we all know morals have changed. In fact, they're changing constantly as our civilization becomes more enlightened. Let's leave these antiquated ideas behind, shall we?
You have control over your own life. If you don't want to practice polyamory, no one's saying you have to, but neither do you have the right to shame others who do.
So it would seem that the first step in getting rid of shame is to identify the norm being broken and then ask yourself, do I believe this norm is healthy and true?
The next step will be to determine if what you're feeling is guilt or shame. Guilt would be taking responsibility for something you've done, for a specific act. Shame would make you feel negative about yourself in a very general way. In our example, Brittany feels these sexual urges. Should she feel guilty about that? It's not something she has chosen to do. Those desires just arise within her. Therefore, guilt is not appropriate. Does she feel a general sense of negativity about herself for having these feelings? Then she's experiencing shame and is not necessary or appropriate.
And what about Edgar? He has a longing for more than one loving, affirming relationship. Has he committed a specific act he should feel guilty for? He hasn't done anything yet except feel the natural longing for human connection. No, when he thinks about this longing, a pervasive sense of not okay sweeps over him. This is the hallmark of shame.
Once you recognize shame and recognize that you don't have to agree with the morals being imposed upon you, I hope you'll realize that whether or not you feel shame is up to you. Shame is, at the essence, a fear of disconnection. During our hunter-gatherer days, being alienated from the tribe meant you quite possibly would not survive. But today, you can find your own tribe or create your own. No one's going to starve, freeze to death, or be eaten by a tiger if they are alienated from the tribe. Disconnection, while not pleasant, is not lethal, as it was at one time. Sometimes disconnection from toxic people who are trying to shame you is actually a blessing. In fact, the Center for Unhindered Living was born many years ago out of a need for connection with those who do not accept the status quo and who support each other in their choices of unpopular lifestyles. We would welcome you to join our learning community. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow this podcast.
Is there any reason why someone should be ashamed of living a polyamorous lifestyle? Current research shows that polyamorous individuals experience just as much satisfaction in their lifestyle as monogamous people do. It's not hurting anyone, so why would anyone need to be ashamed of it?
Probably, as Dr. Morrison expressed in his book, many feel polyamory will bring about the end of civilized society. But what is considered civilized has changed over the centuries and will continue to change. In fact, at many times during our evolution as a species, polyamory was the norm. There's no reason to fear it or be ashamed of it. Visit the Center for Unhindered Living's blog at unhindered-living.com. Join our Facebook page at facebook.com/unhinderedliving. Have something to say about this? Leave a comment, join the discussion. Thanks for listening and have a great day. Currently, episodes of this podcast can be found on Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Amazon Music, and Radio Public, as well as our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Bye.